All right, everybody. We've had to do a little bit of plan B here. I don't know if it's our internet or if all of Facebook is down or what, but it would not let us do a live broadcast. So we will do just do this over Zoom, and then we'll post the recording in the group. So um, what are we talking about today?
Toxicity of tracking. Is it
Yes.
tracking specifically
Well,
or
just
just in the
tracking
fitness space?
your nutrition in general. Is it unhealthy to track your food, track your calories, track your macros? Obviously, I think you guys probably all know where we stand on this because we do promote tracking calories and tracking macros.
Yeah.
But there's definitely some nuance here. And I think there's definitely, a situations where you can take it too far and it can be unhealthy and it can be toxic, just like anything else.
Yeah. It's
Um,
definitely a conversation though. Like we've definitely heard from, just clients, just folks in general, opinions that, I think the thought is that it can get obsessive, and therefore unhealthy. So it's kind of an interesting topic, I think, today.
yeah, for sure. Sorry, I'm posting the link in the Facebook group in case anyone is watching and wants to get on here with us. And again, it's like anything else. I think your relationship with working out can be unhealthy and can be toxic as well. Um, and it's all about balance. And on the other side of that too, I think not being aware at all of what you're eating and just feeding yourself full of processed, nutrient barren garbage for the most part is not healthy either. So
That can also be toxic. So yeah, I do think there for sure there's a balance there. Um, but also like Derek said from our experience, I think it's just anything these days I feel like, people can consider them toxic just depending on their situation as well. So,
for sure. And there's certain situations where we would probably not recommend tracking food. Like if you have a history of an eating disorder, for example,
mhm.
that's probably a situation where something like tracking could be triggering for you, and we might want to avoid it. But that doesn't mean that we still can't steer you towards better eating habits, focusing more on getting you the nutrients that you need, getting you the protein that you need, eating mostly whole foods, drinking more water. All that stuff still is appropriate pretty much across the board. Um, you know, and then depending on your goals, it may or may not be appropriate or necessary to get more granular and more detailed with that.
Yeah, for sure.
So, one of the first things I wanted to bring up is, when it comes to this topic, and this is one of the problems that I have with it in general, is that we don't attach this kind of thinking generally to anything else in life. Now, obviously, if you take it to the extreme, that's a different conversation. But most of us are tracking our finances to some degree. We don't just spend money indiscriminately and have no idea, what our bank account looks like or how much money we have coming in. Like obviously some of us are better than others, but for the most part, we're all keeping somewhat track of finances. We make lists of what we want to accomplish for the day. We make a grocery list before we go to the store. We plan out our workouts. We have a program for our workouts, hopefully, that we're following in order to help structure that. So, we tend to, as a society, be perfectly okay and accepting of structure and order and tracking data for anything else in our lives that we deem to be important. But for some reason, when it comes to food and our nutrition, we don't feel like that is appropriate, and we feel like that is um,
Can get like
somehow too
unhealthy.
restrictive, unhealthy, toxic, whatever you want to call it. Um, and a lot of this I think is we've made it taboo to track your nutrition, and one of the reasons for that is you're in the minority immediately. If you are someone who wants to be healthy and is actually being conscious of what you're eating, conscious of how much you're eating, conscious of some of the things that you're putting in your body, whether or not you're staying up late at night, things like that, you immediately, in most circles, obviously, some of you may be in a circle of friends and family where everybody's into that, and that's great. But in most circles, you're going to be the odd man out in those situations. You're going
Yeah.
to be kind of the black sheep. And I think that right off the bat kind of makes it a little bit more difficult because humans, we tend to want to be accepted. We want to be, part of the in crowd. We don't necessarily, most of us naturally don't want to be um, outcasts. And so you kind of have to get over that initial thinking to begin with.
Right. Well,
And
also, if you're like the only one, doing these things, a lot of times people, will kind of say, wow, you're obsessed with this, just because they're not in the lifestyle. And so they don't maybe understand it as much. And it's not necessarily to me like an obsession to want to better yourself. Obviously, it can get that way, but so can anything else. But yeah, I think sometimes when people see you doing something different, they kind of label that as like a negative thing.
for sure. And a lot of times it's just the simple fact of this may not be important to those people. They might be keeping track of something else that's important in their lives that's not important to you. So it's all a very individualistic thing. Um, but we tend to want to put this blanket statement over nutrition and say, if you're tracking and, being more indiscriminate about what you're eating, that somehow that's detrimental to you and that's too restrictive for you. And I think a lot of it is because we do attach, humans we're the only species that does this as far as we can tell. Other animals are just eating for survival. And again, that goes back to the idea of, when our species was more in its infancy, obviously food was more scarce and we were kind of the same way. We had to hunt for our food, and we just ate whatever we could get to survive. Now in modern times, it's become much more of a complicated situation because um, even people who are in the very low income socioeconomic status still have a lot of food available to them for the most part. And so we've attached these emotions to our food.
Yeah, bingo. I think that's exactly for me looking at this, that's why I think so many people feel like it can get toxic is because there's so much emotion wrapped into our food. And, for a lot of folks, they feel like, okay, like I didn't eat great today, so I'm a failure. Or like, it's like you automatically kind of associate like how your day is going or what kind of person you are based on like what you're eating. And that's certainly not very healthy to do. And I think people give food so much power. And at the end of the day, food is just food. Like that's it. So,
It's fuel for your body.
right.
And if you can learn to kind of separate that, and that's not to say that we shouldn't enjoy a meal or shouldn't have occasions where we enjoy, a nicer dining experience. I mean, we are, we are, that is another thing that obviously separates us from the rest of the animal kingdom is that we do have those human emotions and we do want to enjoy some of those situations, with friends and with family, and that's fine. There's no reason why we can't do that. But it's when we start to feel like all of our eating experiences should be this very decadent, indulgent experience that, tantalizes your taste buds at every bite. I feel like that's where we've kind of gotten off track a little bit. And if you can kind of separate that and understand that what you put into your body is literally what's making the wheels turn, and start gearing some of your decisions around what to eat and what not to eat primarily for that, that's when, we start to see some more positive things happen. You'll immediately, almost immediately, start to feel the difference, and then you can kind of ride that momentum from there. But, um, I think a lot of it, it's a combination of that emotional attachment giving our food so much power over us. And then that does tend to be where it can kind of spiral downhill into a little bit more of a toxic relationship when, like you said, we attach that to our self-worth as a person.
Right.
And we tend to be very hard on ourselves, because we've deemed, a day of eating
Define
to be
us
a
kind
failure,
of.
and to
Yeah.
define us. Um, when in reality, that's not the case. One day of, you know, not ideal eating is perfectly fine. Like, it happens, we all do it. Like, but you just have to start to learn. And again, that goes back to the educational portion of it. Like, we first have to know what foods are going to serve us better. And so that's a lot of what we try to do with our content is, first of all, help you understand that, because that's not something that a lot of people inherently know either. Just because a lot of us have grown up around just more of a processed food environment,
Mhm.
and we don't really know any better. And so, you can build your habits around eating more whole natural foods, and you can actually get your taste buds to, um, you know, actually adjust to what you're eating, to where those things do taste good to you. Like, most of what I eat, I enjoy. It's not like I'm having to force feed myself food that I hate. Like, I've found a way to eat well that agrees with, what my tastes are. And I think that that's something that most of us can do if we put a little bit of effort into it. And then after, once you have made that transition, then it becomes more difficult to do otherwise. Like, eating more heavy processed foods for me, is not really all that enjoyable, really. And a lot of it is because I've attached more of a feeling of, how is this going to make me feel? How is this going to, you know, affect my performance for the rest of the day, and, physically and cognitively. And so,
Well, it's honestly like more of a clinical way to look at food than an emotional way,
yeah,
you know?
yeah. So we're looking at it more logically, like we would pretty much anything else in our lives. Like, when you're looking at balancing your checkbook, these are hard, concrete numbers. There's no guesswork. We're not, oh, well, I feel like I didn't spend this much money this month. Well, you're looking at it on the paper. You did or you didn't. There's no like in between. And so when you can kind of break down your diet the same way, it's no different.
Yeah,
It's
without attaching so much
without,
emotion
right.
to it. Yeah.
And I guess, the financial thing, maybe there are some people, maybe there is some emotion attached to that where, you feel bad if you spent money on something to some degree. But, for the most part, we can separate that more, and we're looking at it more from an objective standpoint and just looking at the hard data and making adjustments from there.
Yeah, if you kind of look at tracking as like a guide for you, as opposed to like a rigid thing that you have to follow. And if you don't, then you failed at it. I think that's kind of what comes into play there. And you have to think too, if you're eating emotionally for like comfort, if you're eating because you're depressed, if you're eating for anxiety or whatever it is, to me, that is more toxic than kind of, looking at what you're eating and how it's affecting your body and just knowing what you're doing and knowing where to start and where you want to go. And that's what tracking is really for. It's not to, have some numbers that like punish you if you don't hit them. So I think it's just like the way we look at things that we have to kind of change our mindset around. And I think with fitness in general and nutrition in general, it's hard to do because we've been indoctrinated with a lot of stuff. And so to kind of like weed through that, and it's not just tracking, but it's like, hey, guess what? You can eat more than you thought you could, or hey, like, protein, you can eat a ton of protein, like you don't have to starve, all of those things. And I think tracking is just another thing in that bucket of like, hey, this isn't actually what you think it is, Does that make sense?
Definitely, yeah. I mean, it's a means to an end. It's a roadmap, is basically what it is. The same way you wouldn't get in your car to drive to Florida, from wherever the hell, where are we? Colorado. I'm not going to get in my car and
Right.
with the intention of going to Florida and start heading west, and that's what a lot of us do. Like we're moving, we're doing things, but we're not going in the right direction because we don't have a guide, we don't have any structure around it. And so, we have to build in that structure and we have to learn to kind of be able to detach from it and just look at the hard facts, look at the data, and figure out a way that we can make it work for us. And that's what we do within our coaching program because there is no one size fits all. If there was, it'd be great. There'd be no reason for our profession to exist. No one would have any health problems, or we wouldn't have an obesity problem because we'd have it figured out by now. And so, doing what your neighbor did or what your cousin did or the fitness influencer online, like what works for them is not necessarily going to work for you. But, finding a way to build out that structure to where you can do these things consistently, and it is, somewhat enjoyable, and there's no reason why it can't be enjoyable, I think is the key. And
Well, again, you don't listen, you don't have to track to make progress. You don't
that's
have
true.
to. But for us, we found that that's the most easy. I don't know if it's easy, but it's the best way to kind of see where you are and where you want to be and what you're putting into your body. It's really eye-opening to see that too, and where you can improve and those kinds of things. But again, like if you're a person that's like, I just can't track or it's toxic for me or I don't want to, you don't necessarily have to do it. We have just found that it's super helpful for us and for our clients.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, it's the least restrictive way to do it because that allows me to be able to include a lot of other things in my diet that I
Right.
might be inclined to restrict more if I wasn't tracking because I would know that that would add a lot of additional calories to my day. And so by tracking, I can sort of strategically fit things in. And but I'm still gravitating mostly towards the same types of foods each day. And if you wanted to go about this without tracking at all, I think that's fine. But you definitely want to be consuming mostly whole foods. Um, and that goes back to, where humans evolved from. Like the reason that we did not have an obesity problem 1,000 years ago is because there just wasn't a lot of food available, and the food that was available was coming from nature. It wasn't made in a factory where we found a way to pack a lot of calories into a small package of food, and put a bunch of scientists in charge of making it taste good and making you want to keep eating it. So, if you if you need to make changes, if you need to lose weight, the first thing I would look at is focusing on primarily eating whole foods in your diet. So foods that are recognizable in nature, foods that our ancestors would have most likely gravitated towards, like, um, you know, whole animal proteins, dairy products, whole grains, vegetables, starches, things like that, things that grow out of the ground, grow on trees. And I'm not talking about, a paleo diet or anything like that. Like it doesn't need to be like regionally appropriate to, what would have been available in, the caveman times
Mhm.
or anything like that. But just mostly foods that have been minimally processed by human hands and that are recognizable in their natural form because those foods are number one going to be more nutrient dense, so they're going to give your body more of what you need. It's going to fill you up more because of that, because your body's more nourished. And they also tend to be lower in calories. So, you can eat, I'm sure you've all seen the demonstrations of the 4 or 5 huge plates of food that are like rice and or potatoes and broccoli and chicken and things like that. And it's equal to like one meal from a fast food restaurant. So when we're eating more of these processed foods, when we're eating chips, when we're eating candy, like things that are high in sugar, liquid calories like sodas and Starbucks coffees and things like that, the calories can add up very quickly on cue there. The calories can add up very quickly, and you're getting very little actual nutrients out of that. And so that's where we tend to get ourselves into trouble. So if you want to make changes and you don't want to track calories or macronutrients, that's fine. But you really need to start shifting your priorities towards higher protein, more whole natural foods.
Well, listen too, if you do, what we usually recommend is people start with tracking, just so you get used to it. You know that, if you end up not tracking at some point, like if you're like, I want to take a break from this, you can always do that. And then when you're ready to kind of go in a fat loss phase, go in a bulking phase, if you have a specific goal, that's where tracking really comes in handy. So even, again, like we like to kind of start with that just to get people used to it. And we don't expect you to do it for like the rest of your life forever and ever consistently and never stop. I personally, will track when I have a goal in mind. And then when I want to take a break, I'll just take a break from tracking. And it's so it doesn't feel like this big toxic like task hanging over me all the time. So that's something that you can do as well. And you can make it less, intense or daunting if you want to, and just kind of go into it with like, hey, I want to learn how to do this. Also, once you learn how to do it, it's super easy. It's not as time consuming, all of those things. It's just kind of second nature to you because it becomes a habit. So for me, like after taking a break from it, when I pick it back up, it's like no big deal. So I think it's really like everything else with nutrition and fitness and all of those things. It's all about your mindset, really.
For sure. And it's a skill and it's a tool in your toolbox to have when you need it. And so, that is, as you progress through our program, that is the ultimate goal, is to help you understand, yes, we want you to know how to track and we want you to be comfortable with that, but we also want you to be spending most of the year not tracking. And then when you have more of an intentional goal that you're pursuing, then we need to get a little bit more granular and a little bit more dialed in and at least track for for a couple weeks until we feel like we're getting more dialed in with where we need to be. Because the reality is, most of the year, if we're just trying to maintain, we can be 300 to 500 calories off one way or the other, and it's going to kind of balance out as long as we're not going to an extreme one way or the other for long periods of time. But if you're like, I got to lose 10 pounds, the odds of you being able to do that by guessing is less likely. And so, we can't really have days where we're in a 500 calorie surplus, for 3 days in a row and expect to lose body fat consistently. So that's where tracking comes in handy and having that skill. And it may just be a matter of cutting portion sizes a little bit or eliminating a snack that you might normally have throughout the day. And we don't want to stay there forever. Like if you've worked with us for any period of time, we're constantly saying your dieting phases should be relatively few and far between over the course of a year. If we've got a lot of weight to lose, we're going to go back to it often, but we're going to break that up with periods at maintenance because we don't want to spend 6 months dieting. That's when we start to have the metabolic adaptations where your metabolism is going to slow down and we got to keep eating less, and we don't want that. And that's when we tend to have, some of the backlash from being too restrictive and, having cravings, and we end up binging and things like that. So, we want you to get an understanding of where your maintenance is, and we want you to get more comfortable there. And the best way to do that, in our opinion, is to spend some time tracking and get comfortable, understanding what foods are going to be more advantageous to you, what foods are going to be foods that you need to consume more in moderation. And you kind of got to go through that process of trial and error to learn that kind of stuff. because, we don't necessarily want to eliminate those things. We just want to understand, where they fall in the hierarchy.
Right. Yeah. I feel like too, when people kind of first start tracking as well, like if you are an emotional eater or you tie a lot of emotion into your food, it's pretty wild once you start eating cleanly, and especially when you eat more protein and you're really tracking that, how much more satiated you are, and less likely to eat a lot of junk food. And a lot of times, when we aren't eating a lot of protein and we're binging on junk food, that's when the emotion comes in of, oh my gosh, like I'm awful and all the things. So I think tracking really helps to just kind of help you feel better. And it actually, to me, it's like kind of the opposite of toxic, in the fact that you learn how to eat better and then you feel better about yourself through it. So
Yeah, for sure. So the other part of this that I wanted to touch on, which this can be a touchy subject, but we've attached obviously a big part of this is that we've attached negativity to the idea of being conscious of what you eat. And a lot of that I think ties back into the idea of body positivity. We now obviously we're not in favor of shaming anyone or trying to make them feel bad. But when it comes to talking about nutrition, when it comes to talking about health, like to me, this is more of an issue of your health, your quality of life. I could care less what anyone looks like. If you're happy with the way you look, then that's great. No one should have the right to tell you that you should look a different way. But when it comes down to actual metabolic health, your quality of life, your ability to avoid chronic diseases, avoid just being sick all the time. Nobody wants that. Lack of mobility. Nobody, that's for most of us, that's going to put a really going to hamper us in being able to do the things that we enjoy doing. So when it comes to that, it's a pretty cut and dry issue to me. Like if you're 50, 100 pounds overweight or more, this is not healthy. And changes need to be made in order for you to live your best life. And so I think we've attached the idea of nutrition and exercise and being healthy. We've attached that to the idea of, you know, again, you can take that too far to the extreme too. And not everybody needs to be jacked and shredded with a six pack and going to the gym 6 days a week for 3 hours and, uh, you know, consuming 8 protein shakes a day. That's the other end of the extreme, and that's not probably any healthier. But when it comes to being severely overweight and making changes, I think it's pretty imminent. And we are one of the sickest countries in the world, unfortunately, and also one of the wealthiest. So it's not a matter of a lack of resources. It's not really even a matter of a lack of education because, there's plenty of that. There's plenty of information out there. So there's definitely something else going on. A lot of it is societal. And a lot of it is, just the fact that we've kind of accepted this as the norm. Um, and, our healthcare system doesn't push back on it much because it's good for them financially. And so, I think that we've kind of gone a certain distance in the wrong direction in terms of that goes. And again, I think it's probably maybe a natural pushback to having spent some time at the other extreme, and hopefully it'll balance itself out. But, I think this is one of the challenges that we still have in
yeah.
terms of trying to help people understand how to live healthier lives.
Sure. And I think you nailed it on the head when you said it doesn't really matter what you look like. What you look like isn't, the issue here, with, body positivity movement. You should look however the hell you want to look. However, if you want to feel good and, like Derek said, not have chronic disease and, a lot of those health issues, then, obesity is a huge issue, in our country. And so I think we need to keep that in mind, that just talking about health and nutrition is not toxic. It's almost toxic to go too far the other way, to say like, well, it's perfectly healthy to be obese. Like it isn't. And it's not, again, it's not any disrespect, nothing like that towards people that are obese, but also like we all want to feel better. We all want to, feel healthy and have longevity and mobility and all of those things. And so that's something to think about as well.
For sure. And I think, empowering people to make those changes in their life too is a big part of it. When we perpetuate the narrative of, oh, it's not your fault, or it's, environmental, or it's
Genetics, yeah.
genetics. Yeah, like, and there's some genetic component for sure. But more than likely what's going on is it's more of a lifestyle thing. People who are obese children tend to have obese parents. And it's not because that's genetic, it's because they are living the same lifestyle that their parents are, and vice versa. And so I think when we perpetuate those narratives, we take the power out of people's hands uh, to make those changes, and people are more likely to become what's the word I'm looking for? The word
Apathetic? I don't know.
apathetic or complacent was what I was trying to say. Um, and so I think that's a lot of what we have going on here is that we've normalized it.
Told too over and over, like you can't, you can't, you can't. You're just gonna be
Yeah.
like, okay, I can't.
Exactly. And it's the
Yeah.
same principle as we did the talk last week or whenever about how you talk to yourself makes a big difference. We can, is it gonna be harder for some people than others? Yes, definitely. Um, but that doesn't mean that you still can't be a better version of yourself, that you still can't make improvements. We shouldn't be comparing ourselves to others anyway. We should be comparing ourselves more to what we were yesterday or last year, and trying to make, steady improvements. We all have the ability to do that, no matter where we're starting from. We all have the ability to make steady improvements and become a better version of ourselves than we were yesterday. Some of us have a higher ceiling than others, and that's okay. And I think that's where, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't keep striving for more. But I think a lot of it, I think our expectations in some cases might be skewed. And I think in other cases, I think we kind of render ourselves powerless by adopting more of a victim type mindset and an attitude, and not really giving ourselves the ability to make those changes. And um, I think we can all we'll all be you'd be amazed what you can do when you actually set your mind to it and you start putting the effort into making some of these changes.
Well said.
That pretty much wraps it up, I think. So I guess in closing, I mean, is it unhealthy to track? It certainly can be, just like any other thing. I also think it's very unhealthy to, not be aware of what you're eating at all and sort of fall into what we would consider the standard American diet, which, as we mentioned, has not worked out well for most of us. We have an extremely high rate of obesity and overweight people in this country. I just saw something the other day where our life expectancy is like 66th in the world. Um, and that includes, some very small uh, African countries that have very little resources at their disposal. And so, I think that should be alarming to a lot of us that, we are kind of moving in the wrong direction in terms of health and longevity. And so, we need to start trying to figure out a way to reverse that. And I think it starts with individuals taking more individual responsibility for themselves, for their own family, for their own health, and for the health of their families, and just trying to build better habits and lifestyles accordingly.
Cheers.
All right. Well, hopefully somebody will watch this. We'll put the recording in the Facebook group as we were not able to go live. But I hope everybody has a great rest of your day, and we'll talk to you soon.
Bye.